right, all right. Hello, can everybody hear me? Oh, I gotta fix something. How about now? That should work better. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Can we all hear me? Excellent. All right. It's been a while. Hi. Is everybody? I've had quite the 6 months. Had a lot of problems with the dialysis access and a lot of associated surgeries, and kind of, took it out of me. And I was away for a while, but I'm happy to say I'm back. Hi, everybody. It's been a little bit, and we have made a change. You might have noticed there's some nice, pretty new art, and there's some very nice new decals for us as well. And so, the first thing, the big thing, Hetman has decided he's going to pursue a PhD, which he'll be starting this fall. So he is going to be basically throwing all of his time into that. I wish him the best of luck. Very happy for him. He might show up from time to time. He thought about showing up tonight, but wasn't able to make it. It's going to be we're going to very proud of him. Very happy he's got this opportunity. So that's good for him. So that means the channel is changing. I have changed it from Two Guys Talking History to Daedalus History, and I will be pretty much the single person doing all the things going forward. So that's exciting. It's a fun rebrand. To go off that rebrand, you can see we have new artwork. My particular favorite is this one. You might recognize that as Avery, the excellent puppy. And you should like and subscribe because Avery is very adorable. On top of that, we are going to start doing regular streams again every Friday night around 7:30 Mountain Time. You can convert that yourself. It is GMT +7 right now, maybe, I think. Uh, 3 streams minimum a month will be regular streams. The final stream of the month, whether that's 4th Friday or 5th Friday, will be a call-in stream for everyone who wants to call in and talk about virtually anything, as long as it complies with YouTube TOS. I suspect that's going to start slow, but it'll be fun. As for the rest of it, we are, and if anyone like Gemt, Pippa, or Titan, could you do me a favor? Type in the chat, !Discord, and see if it works properly for you, and it's not working for me because apparently Stream Elements is really literal about what level a user can do a thing. But let's see if that works. We've opened up our Daedalus History Discord for nope, it's definitely not working. Okay. Plug and play my ass. We've opened up the Daedalus History Discord as a community Discord now going forward, so it should be searchable. You can join. You get updates on the channel. It'll be fun. We're going to try to start building a lot more activity out of that Discord for reasons that will become very apparent if you've been paying attention to other things. It should be somewhere. Okay, that's irritating. Let's just do this. And I will go battle Stream Elements later tonight. And finally, we're going to start doing more video essays. I'm writing one. I am now writing a second one. And the one I am writing right now will come out uh Wednesday-ish, hopefully. Fingers crossed. So yeah, I am back. We're going to be doing other things. It should be a good time. That said, it's been a while. A lot of stuff has happened. Donald Trump has lost to Iran. The Strait of Hormuz, which was open in February, is now closed. That's good. That's obviously, what we wanted to have happen there. Not really. And as of this week, there is now a plan being put in place in the National Defense Authorization Act to merge R&D and a significant amount of spending that we would have given the Israeli military into the American military structure and merge our intelligence systems. It is not great at all. And I was reading through this the other day, and I went and I read the bill, and I don't think there's ever been. I can't recall ever if there's ever been anything similar to this ever. And come to find out from an article later on, um, come to find out from an article later on that this is Netanyahu's plan that he just sort of dumped on several congressmen, and they put it in the thing, and they put it in the Defense Authorization Act, and now it's cleared the committee and going to the whole House. So if there is ever a time that the United States wishes to extract itself from Israel, it will be a million times more complicated. Possibly not possible. So that's great. Where is my timer? Oh, it's all the way up there. Why does YouTube keep moving things? So that's great. Uh this is I think a reaction to the fact that Israel's ability to control the narrative in the wake of October 7th, and more specifically the brutalities and excesses of the campaign in Gaza, have basically been on display for the whole world to see. And this has caused a marked decrease in the ability of people to just say, yes, I support Israel. It is kind of becoming apparent that they don't really need support nearly as much as they need someone to rein them in. And the discussions that have come out of this lately have been horrifying. A few months back, there was a Biden admin official who was talking about Holocaust education, and she expressed a certain amount of horror that people had taken the message from the Holocaust of we shouldn't let anyone be genocided, instead of we should specifically not let Jews be genocided. And I, one of the people who sat through Holocaust education here in the United States, kind of thought that the point was that no one should be genocided. Silly me. And another thing. Ben Gavir, uh, and Smotrich, and the whole crowd around Netanyahu have gone kind of nuts in their like disdain for even trying to appear like they're following the international law. For example, I read a report one day of, I think it was Ben Gavir's birthday cake had a noose on it. And I'm like, surely this is made up. This has to be something that's made up. Like, this is like a made up story. Nope. Is real. Was a thing that happened. And you're like, well, that's a little on the nose. So it's been a little rough watching that situation spiral. On the flip side, Ukraine is looking much, much better now. Not necessarily in that they're taking land back in any kind of significant pace, but a number of areas they've managed to outflank Russian forces, and using a combination of artillery and drones. They've got not necessarily the Russians surrounded or encircled. They have the Russians on the ropes. I'm going to move this over here because I seem to be looking over here. They have the Russians on the ropes. They're not getting supplies in or out effectively. They're not getting wounded, evacuated. It's going very well, but it's a very recent development. So we'll have to see how that goes. Tonight, we're going to look at a video from SK Media, the YouTuber, who's actually a friend of Hetman, who he introduced me to. And that is going to be the meat of this evening, to be fair. We'll see how long this goes. We're going to start working up to longer and longer streams as I feel up to it. It'll be a process, though.
Hey everyone,
All right, let me get that up properly. Oh, let's see what else is new on the. Oh yeah, if you look down at the bottom, super chats and memberships are available. If you are feeling generous, we appreciate any generosity. I am going to start pushing a little bit more heavily, trying to make this a viable enterprise. So we're going to come up with a goal for weekly streams. And like I said earlier in the Discord post and the community post, if you have a thing that you are just dying to have me cover, throw it in a super chat or send a donation and we will look at it. Probably won't look at certain things like the Destiny drama. I don't really want to watch that anymore. It's just sad. Let's try to keep it pertinent. All right. Let's go ahead. This is SK Media. If you haven't checked out his channel, he is an American who volunteered to serve in the Ukrainian military at the outset of the invasion in 2022. He has since that time been serving as a drone operator, and presently I think he's back behind the line at this particular moment in time. But he put out this video a few days ago and giving his thoughts on the direction of the war in 2026. So we're going to take a look at that.
Hey everyone, I am back, albeit briefly. As many longtime viewers know, my day job kind of precludes me from regularly uploading YouTube videos, unfortunately. However, at the moment, I do have the time to put out at least a couple uploads. Hopefully, I'm working on at least 2 videos at the same time right now. Also, while I was away from home and not able to put out any videos, I started doing a lot of work on my Patreon page, and that link is in a description. Some of that work is actually free because I wanted to attract new people while I couldn't upload here. So you're welcome to browse the free podcast I made and free articles I wrote, and hopefully you'll become a patron, and then you can unlock all the content that I put on that Patreon page. I'm doing this upload now just because I want to have a little more content out there, just in case I'm not able to get all these videos done before I head back out to work. As far as the topic goes, I'm going to kind of skim over a lot of stuff, and unfortunately I don't have the time to get into granular details. But just broadly speaking, I want to talk about the direction of the war as it stands in 2026. Pretty much since the beginning of the year, things have really been turning around in our favor, and there have been a number of factors that contribute to this. If you've been following the news, you might have noticed 2 things. One thing is that in the past few months, Ukrainian forces have been rolling back Russian advances in Zaporizhia Oblast and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, basically erasing the gains that Russia was able to make.
Yeah, Zaporizhia Oblast is where I believe the largest concentration of those outflanked Russians is, and it's something on the order of like 50 to 60,000 Russian troops that are presently being harassed pretty heavily by drones and artillery.
In 2025. Now, there is one big caveat here when we talk about pushing these guys back. It makes it sound like some kind of big, successful counteroffensive. In reality, a lot of that territory that was marked red was really more realistically gray. If you understand the way Russian tactics work, and also if you've ever actually seen how they operate since about 2024 or so, you will understand why that is. Basically, when we talk about the front line, it's not so much a line. There are certainly defensive works and everything like that, but it is extremely porous. And from about 2024 on, Russians have often taken advantage of this, usually using things like motorcycles and using kind of more expendable troops. And what they do is they will disperse into small groups, and by the time they're getting even close to the actual front line, they're in small groups of maybe 3 people. Sometimes you see them even walking in pairs. Many of these guys are sent out with pretty much no plan. Some of them are actually sent on assaults that are expected to fail. They're actually being punished by their commanders. Their commanders, of course, will get rewarded if one of these poor dumb bastards manages to plant a flag in some house somewhere. If he gets killed 5 minutes later because he gets spotted by a drone, they don't care. They still get to mark the map red. Now, if those guys survive for a certain length of time, other small teams will come up to them and sort of reinforce those positions, and then they sort of build up a presence, and then they can actually potentially hold that territory, and that's kind of how they've managed to advance. The fact is that there still is a critical lack of infantry on the Ukrainian side, so
which has been problematic for both countries, is force generation and bringing in enough people to build units that can move in large numbers. The other half of it is that artillery and drones have made it very difficult to concentrate forces. So what you get is, even in like his description of these tactics, you're seeing a kind of a need to kind of push down towards squad and team level tactics anyway, because if you start to try to throw a company or a platoon out in force through these areas, they're going to get spotted and hit and destroyed. So like the nature of the way that the war is being fought and the technology that has emerged from this situation is dictating a change in tactics from what you would expect in a more traditional NATO army, where they mass a large force, overwhelm a position, and take it. This is makes it so that, like, every time we're talking about something like a Russian advance and takes a house, like you said, or Ukrainians push back, it's a very small portion. It's kind of an agonizingly slow process all around. Yeah, I probably should turn this a little bit down and this a little bit up. How up am I? I am all the way up. Let's go this over here. Can you hear me now? Why is that pinned to the bottom?
basically what the Ukrainians usually do is they can send out teams and units to basically sweep these guys out of these positions, but with some exceptions, most of the time they cannot hold that line after the fact. So then, given that that situation hasn't really changed, why is it different now in 2025? Well, in the past months, going back to at least January, if not December, Russian casualties actually now significantly exceed the number of guys they're able to recruit every month. Their usual recruitment has been about 30,000 a month, and basically they're losing about 35,000 each month now. Big question is why.
That is a much more conservative number than I heard reported a few weeks back. A few weeks back, they were talking about something on the order of 50,000 a month, which sounded like a lot to me in terms of casualties. 35,000 sounds a lot more reasonable for the scale that we are talking about.
So there have been a lot of advances in drone warfare. It's just basically constant advances now on both sides. The Russians adapted. They were very effective in employing fiber optic drones, for example. One thing the Russians did that gave them kind of an advantage in 2025, and it got sort of precarious for us, is that they have a lot of these cheap Molnia drones, for example. These have a longer range than your average FPV, at least at the time. They carry a very large warhead, for example. They can
What is wrong?
carry a TM-62 anti-tank mine, and they can be very effectively used not only against vehicles like vehicles that are supplying troops at the front or delivering troops to the front or carrying them off the line or whatever. ever, but they're also very useful against the positions that are needed to do drone operations. So I'm talking like your FPV positions, your Mavic positions,
The other problem I am having is we recently upgraded our home internet, and it is actually substantially better now. And I had the encoder turned down way low to keep it from overloading, and it is now too slow. So I have to adjust that as well.
stuff like that. So what the Russians were doing that was effective is basically their drone war had depth. It's actually, there's a term that people are using, at least the Russians use this term, the small sky, and they're talking about all these tactical level drones. The thing is, what has happened is Ukraine has responded very adequately to this with its own sort of mid-range drones as well as deep strike drones, but even FPVs now fly much further. The last unit that I was in, they talked about pushing an ordinary FPV 60 kilometers without the use of a mothership or something like that. The range of FPVs, just the ordinary 10-inch, for example, it's getting a lot longer now, so they can cover much more of the battlefield. Now, of course, we have fixed-wing drones like the Rom-2, Rom-2X. There's actually a Ukrainian copy of the Molnia. It's like literally the same thing. It's even called Bliskovka, which is basically the same as Molnia, only in Ukrainian. There's darts. I've even seen some fixed-wing bomber drones that are getting some use. I think one reason why you're seeing this dramatic increase in casualties is because of that depth, because when I was operating as an FPV pilot, we were usually operating against targets that were maybe around 4 or 5 kilometers away from us. And when the guys are at that range, they've already broken down into smaller groups. They're kind of moving a bit more tactically. Sometimes they do dumb shit. I have videos of guys just standing in the open. It's even funnier when they do it at night and they just go for a stroll across an open field. And when you have a thermal camera and there's one guy walking across the field, like he stands out from a long distance. But normally, in my experience, we were dealing with targets that basically guys go into a blindage that's like a bunker, dugout actually would be more accurate, or they're in houses or something, and they're kind of moving more tactically, or they're more careful because they understand that FPV drones are a thing. Now, if you were able to fly, let's say, 15 kilometers behind their front line, and you have sufficient battery life, you have good enough, clear enough video signal to pick out targets and stuff like that, that is more likely where you're going to see guys sort of more relaxed, guys just sitting around having a smoke, eating, whatever. They're sitting grouped together. They may be riding in a vehicle together. Maybe they're not even riding up to the front line. They're just going between their safe houses or
This has been a pretty consistent. This has been a pretty consistent observation, first in Ukraine and now across the fronts in Iran, with Iran. The idea that you can reach targets that are not the front line, the idea of a front that is an active war zone and then an area of the rear that we would talk about, like you send a unit to the rear to be safe, is evaporating. So you saw this very early on with in Ukraine, with the way that Russia would be striking at Ukrainian targets in cities like Kiev after they withdrew from the area, or Lviv, which is in western Ukraine. They're able to launch these attacks much easier and fairly frequently. Even now with drones, like you saw positions where the Ukrainians would set up training bases and leave, and they get hit by drones or missiles. Now you're kind of seeing this phenomena pushing into the idea of the rear of the front itself, where you have the ability to strike at targets like that, like you just described, people who aren't expecting to being struck by drones. So this kind of takes a problem and it amplifies it. A unit in the field is trying to be tactical, and they'll set up a security perimeter, and they'll have lookouts and people with weapons to defend the outside of the perimeter, and then people inside will be doing work like planning missions, etc. The idea that you can go to the rear and everyone can rest is important for soldiers. The concept that this is disappearing means that the ability to rest is going to have to change. You're going to have to be in shifts. You're going to have to operate in different ways. where you have to be on guard all the time, and it's going to change the endurance of soldiers over the long term, the mental endurance. Uh, it's hard to say where this is going to go. I have a feeling that drone defenses are a big ticket item right now for everyone. Yes, it is the same for both sides. It's also the same for American soldiers in Gulf bases. We saw a significant amount of people relocated to civilian hotels during the active hostility phase of the Iran conflict, or the more active hostility phase than it is now. The idea that you have a behind the lines sense of safety is evaporating, and this is deeply affecting. Uh, this is why casualty counts are increasing, because you get tired, you make mistakes, and then you get got.
Something like that. And that's where you have the opportunity to make a lot of kills. And as you go further back, you just get more of a target rich environment, because the guys who are 30 kilometers behind the line, 40 kilometers, like these guys most likely think they're safe. So basically, that increasing depth is what enables more kills and can contribute to the larger casualty figures that we're seeing. Now, another big factor
This is more zombies than I bargained for.
this year is that the Russians finally got kicked off Starlink. They should have been kicked off a long time ago. Apparently, somebody had a very hard conversation with Musk, and he understood what he needed to do, and he, in this one occasion, did the right thing. And this created massive problems for Russia's forces, especially their drone forces. Stuff like Rubicon, for example, their elite drone.
Yeah, it's kind of worth noting that Elon Musk went into the 2022 phase of the Russian invasion being incredibly popular in Ukraine. And he squandered all of that by appeasing Putin. Just disastrous. In the exact same way he squandered his popularity by allying himself with Trump.
Unit. It was kind of a shock to them early on. Seeing their reactions was quite amusing. Now, it's not an insurmountable challenge, but they'll never have something quite as good as Starlink. They are finding.
Well, that's also true, Jemp, but by and large, the issue is going to be that there are not that many populations outside of Middle Eastern populations and some African ones that have a lot of experience with civilian populations being targeted in such a way. Like World War II comes along and you have bombers, and as the war closes out, the V1 or V2 rockets, and this presages. Like this is the prelude to all of these things that we are seeing, these technologies 70, 80 years down the line that are just much more difficult to deal with. And we see this shortage of interceptors because we simply don't have the capacity to build enough to outdo all of this equipment. There were some high points, I would say, in interception with Iran. There was a Greek frigate deployed to the area around Cyprus, for example. The Hydra class frigate. You might be familiar with it if you are familiar with the Greek Navy, or you watched TNT's somewhat okay series, The Last Ship, in which they were the antagonist warships in season 4. Very capable little ship. It had an electronic warfare suite on it, and it detected a number of Shahed drones coming in towards Cyprus during the active phase of hostilities. Basically, it shut down the drones a couple 100 miles out. They fell into the water. Just shut it down. No missiles, couple bucks worth of electricity. Everyone and their mother is going to be wanting that technology in very short order.
Workarounds, but the workarounds, well, they take work. Thankfully, we had a little help from the most unexpected source, the Russian government. They are basically trying to lock down Telegram and all these different messenger services. Now, the thing is, the military uses Telegram and these messenger services in their operations, especially drone operations. So once again, they're being hindered at a critical time It also hinders them because just like in Ukraine, you have people crowdfunding stuff. Russia does have people crowdfunding drones through Telegram and stuff like that. I think most of it is scamming and a lot of money gets skimmed off, but they do use Telegram for that. And they've all been bitching about the Telegram ban ever since it was announced. What was funny about it is that many of these Russian mil bloggers, the military bloggers, like they were raising the alarm about this when the Kremlin announced it. And the Kremlin's response to all these guys telling them that, like, hey, you can't
Do I have one leg? No, I have two legs. Thank you very much.
do this. The military heavily relies on Telegram. The official response was just like, no, it doesn't. And this is an important factor. Actually, I spoke to this in my first video before I went off to enlist in Ukraine. And that, if you're trying to find that, if you go into my back catalog, it would have been about beginning of April or end of March 2022. And I was talking about one of the reasons why the Russian invasion initially failed. And it has to do with the fact that the war was planned by Putin and his fellow ex-KGB Soviet boomers. These are very paranoid men. They're very out of touch. Putin has famously been very distrustful of the internet in general. So when his top generals are telling him how great the war is going and they're showing him these maps that we now know are just hilariously wrong, and it's all based on sending out some idiot to go stick a flag somewhere, and he thinks, why do we need this messenger thing? I don't really understand. It's not a rotary dial telephone. I don't get it. Why do we need that? Who cares? A guy like Putin and his inner circle, they see stuff like Telegram as more of a threat to their power rather than as a tool that their military.
Yeah, I would also point out though that this is not necessarily unique. Like you had the Signal chat problem with Pete Hegseth. Uh, what was it, 70 or 80 Trump administration scandals ago? And I would also point out that American military personnel make very heavy use of text messaging to plan things, like not secure texting back and forth about showing up early and like things that are strictly speaking listed under the category of operational security. So like it's funny Russia is doing this, but it's not haha funny. It's whoops, this is just a military problem funny. You'll see like there was a couple of stories that came out over the last year of like naval ships getting caught because sailors signed themselves up for fitness trackers and shit. It's a reoccurring problem. Telegram is very popular overseas as a communication method as well. So the information control ability of Telegram is very minimal, which is why the Russian government would not be fond of it.
Needs. So they go to lock it down. Now, before we talk about other factors, I want to kind of sum up this little chapter, so to speak, by saying that, as I mentioned earlier, the drone war here is constantly evolving, right? We've kind of been neck and neck this whole time. So Ukraine innovates something, it's very effective. Russia develops a countermeasure, then they innovate something, and then it's very effective, and we have to counter it with something of our own. What I see in 2025 happening is that we are really starting to pull ahead. We're no longer neck and neck. We're actually starting to pull ahead of them in this drone war, in this sort of chess game, and we're starting to make distance on them. Basically, we are starting to gain the advantage in one of the most critical spheres in this war, and that's very important. Now, moving on, Ukraine has.
Yeah, I would add that drones have been doing the work of the what would typically be done by air support in a NATO army. So helicopters, close air support, bombing runs, things like that. They have they because there has always been a stalemate in Ukraine between the Russian Air Force and the Ukrainian Air Force, where their air defenses effectively control their own territory, making it very risky to try to fly into Russian controlled territory or Russians flying into Ukrainian controlled territory. This causes a certain, like you'll see footage of a helicopter moving forward, moving forward, moving forward, tilting its nose up and then firing off rockets, for example, sort of like spraying them over the line. The helicopter is stopping well before it gets into danger, firing off rockets and turning around. Or the Russians will make use of their strategic bombers, Tu-22Ms, for example, take off, fly safely behind the Russian border, fire off missiles, and land in concert with a barrage of Shahed drones. Uh, you're not seeing a lot of, like, if you look at how America went into Iran, we lost several airplanes, but we flew over Iranian air defenses and we attacked Iranian air defenses, and the Russians simply aren't doing this. Neither are the Ukrainians, because if they do, they'll get shot down.
Has also drastically increased its long-range capabilities. I'm not going to speak about the development of Ukrainian ballistic missiles yet, but we are now using cruise missiles. Ukraine has shown that it's able to effectively hit targets as far north as St. Petersburg. They've hit targets in the Caspian Sea. They've hit stuff as far east as Chelyabinsk. I don't want to exaggerate too much, but basically, if something is not near Khabarovsk or the Far East, it can potentially be hit. Russian oil and gas infrastructure is taking massive hits on the Black Sea littoral, for example, in Tuapse, Ust-Luga near St. Petersburg. Shadow fleet tankers are being hit. And what's really interesting is that a lot of this stuff has kind of stepped up after President Hamburglar started his special military operation on Iran, which of course is a massive boon to the Russians, especially since now the U.S. has been giving the Russians sanctions waivers to sell their oil. And Ukraine is just saying, okay, well, you can't sell your oil if we blow it up. And the real beauty of all this is that it's being done with Ukrainian-made weapons. So you see, whereas like the Biden administration restricted Ukraine from using U.S. weapons like ATACMS to attack targets in legitimate Russian territory, and of course the Trump administration has basically cut Ukraine off from nearly all aid, they no longer have leverage over Ukraine. As much as Trump has tried to pressure Ukraine into a surrender deal, he can't because he has no leverage. I guarantee you, while Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are trying to negotiate with the Russians, I guarantee you the Russians are demanding that Trump make Ukraine stop bombing their refineries and ships. But here's the thing, if Trump could do anything about that by this point...
Oh, Kozak is very, very aggressively anti-Trump.
He would have. He's out of ideas, and now he's stuck trying to figure out how to get the Strait of Hormuz open. And that...
Yeah, let's be frank. Donald Trump's foreign policy has been a disaster on every front. He's not getting oil out of Venezuela. The Iranians have closed off the Strait of Hormuz. They're not opening it. They feel no compulsion to do so. They're running the train on Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth. The Russians are the Russians succeeded in getting Trump to stop assisting Ukraine, which gave up all of Trump's leverage. And the situation is becoming gradually more untenable for the Russians in the front, which has caused them to try in desperation to attack Ukrainian civilians behind the line, which is a strategy that's never forced the capitulation of a country ever in history through aerial bombardment. So, like, Donald Trump's efforts have largely been failures, an utter disaster for anyone that he's trying to help or assist. The Ukrainians, like, obviously, the Russians getting sanctions relief is not good, but it also hasn't translated into safety for Russian oil. So this is like, I can't say with any kind of certainty that there is going to be a set of circumstances that will allow Ukraine to take back all of its captured territory vis-a-vis 2014. But it's getting to a point that Ukraine might be able to force an end to hostilities on terms that are favorable that they would not have been able to do last year.
Just segues into the next positive point I see. In 2024 and early 2025 as well, the Russians actually experienced a little bit of a bump in recruitment. And the reason for that is because the Russians legitimately believed that Trump would end the war for them. They honestly thought that they are really fighting the U.S., and as long as the U.S. cuts off the aid, then Ukraine will just be forced to come to the table and give them whatever they want. And there were a lot of Russians who looked at those huge bonuses, but they were wary because they see the Telegram videos and they know what happens in the army. But they thought the war's going to end soon, so maybe I go and I pick up that massive bonus and I serve 1 month. Maybe I don't even get to the front, and then I can just go back home and blow it all on Putinka. If you know, you know. Now, by late 2025, I think it was dawning on them. I think it was even dawning on Putin that that's just not going to happen. But now we are going into the middle of 2026, and I think it's very clear to maybe every Russian but Putin that Trump is not going to save them. I think on some level, I think even Putin understands that Trump isn't going to save him. He's probably just believing his generals that they're actually winning and taking all this territory. But if you will pardon the pun, and I do deeply apologize for this, but the Trump card is useless. He is not coming to save them. So the Russians don't really
Boo! That was awful.
have any hope. They even lost one of their most important allies in Europe, of course, being Viktor Orban. Now, I'm not a huge
Yeah, Viktor Orban's losing the election, which is funny when you consider how much foreign interference from J.D. Vance and company went into helping him. Is a disaster for Russia's ability to check the EU.
fan of what Peter Magyar has done so far, but the thing is, the guy is not a literal Russian puppet. Like, whatever stupid shit he's been saying lately about Ukraine, it is his own stupid idea, and he's not taking orders from Moscow. Also, I think this is kind of a minor factor, really, but I have seen a lot of the Russian true believers lamenting what's happened in Venezuela and what's happening in Iran, for example. What happened in Venezuela was mostly for show. This was clearly a prearranged deal, and the Chavista or PSUV government is still in power in Venezuela, so nothing really changed that much. But Russia had a lot of political capital. They built a lot of their myth on this idea that Putin brought them back as a world empire, that they are a global actor, and they have allies in other parts of the world, and the rest of the world needs to take them seriously as a great power. And one of those allies was Venezuela and the Maduro regime. And these Russian patriots, it really hurt their soul to see how easily the U.S. could basically snatch the president of that country, which I might add, has been armed by Russia for a couple decades now, roughly. Russia provided them with air defense systems, and all of it just turned out to be completely useless. And then
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if it's the air defense systems were useless in and of themselves, or the corruption of Maduro's cabinet, such as it were, was just too much. Like, obviously, there was communication happening between the Trump administration and the vice president and others, where they were going to leave him in power. And, like, given the option of fighting for Maduro or screwing Maduro and have a very limited capacity fight in like Maduro's palace, I imagine his government chose to just screw Maduro, live to fight another day, because they figure pretty accurately that Trump will get bored and fuck off somewhere else.
you have what's going on in Iran, where you have President Trump's own very special military operation. And in some ways, it's even dumber than Putin's special military operation, because Putin is at least willing to
At the very least, Putin put ground troops to try to win the fight, and Trump has given up. Surrendered the whole fucking Strait of Hormuz. The very concept of freedom of navigation to the Iranians is without a doubt the most embarrassing thing a American president has ever lost. It makes the entire thing where you have these people like Pete Hegseth and his little tweeter infantry dort walking around talking about lethality and how important war fighting is, becomes fucking embarrassing when you see that Donald Trump surrendered any success that something like Operation Praying Mantis in the 80s had. Just absolutely embarrassing.
commit to what he's doing. So when the initial invasion failed to besiege Kiev and everything like that, they're like, okay, well, we'll try something else and we'll try to just take this territory. And meanwhile,
And I suspect that even the Israelis did not expect an aerial bombardment to end Iran. I think they thought they could kill a lot of Iranians that way, and Israeli government very bloodthirsty, so I'm sure they're happy for that. But I think the Israelis thought that if Donald Trump got involved in Iran, that he would have enough pride on the line to pursue it beyond what the Israelis promised him would happen. Of the regime would falter and collapse because of an aerial bombardment. And when this didn't happen, then the Americans would commit and the Israelis wouldn't have to do anything. And obviously this has been not worked out the way they planned. The IDF is severely overextended in Lebanon, taking huge casualties from the same kind of drones that SK was talking about not but a few minutes ago. It's fairly clear at this point that Netanyahu gravely miscalculated his ability to manipulate Trump.
Trump's dealing with Iran, and he's like, come on, please open the strait. And like every week now, we hear something about how a peace deal is about to be reached, or actually the war's over and we won, but the regime is still in power.
The speculation has been that this is largely to prevent the price of oil from skyrocketing. And this is probably, to be fair, true. Is oil goes up, Donald Trump makes an announcement about a pending peace deal, and oil goes down. And let this be a lesson to anyone, and I do mean anyone, who thinks that being rich and having money means you're smart. Because what you really have in Wall Street is a very large room full of some of the most arrogant lemmings you will ever meet in your life. Just absolutely arrogant little shits who just follow the bouncing ball every single time. Like, imagine being so stupid you've been played by Donald Trump at least a dozen times in as many months.
The strait is not open, at least not to the extent it was before. Gas prices are going through the roof. I mean, the word shit show is an understatement here. This may be one of the dumbest military campaigns in modern history, okay? But to the Russians, I think it's still a gut punch because they spent so many years telling themselves that we have this ally, Iran, and we're supplying them with all kinds of weapons and equipment, air defense.
I'm going to have to disagree a little bit here. Iran has done very well in terms of surviving the onslaught with their military capacity intact. What we're talking about is something that's typically called in military history Fabian tactics, and this is named after a Roman a Roman dictator, rather, who adjusted Roman tactics during Hannibal's invasion of Rome in the Second Punic War to basically not fight Hannibal. Hannibal kept kicking the Romans' ass, and the Romans noticed this and like, well, what if we ran away? And so they did. And you will find this pattern repeated very often, with overwhelming military forces being opposed by a military force that cannot necessarily stand up to them. George Washington has a number of early battles. After the relative success of the campaign around Boston, he gets his teeth kicked in at Long Island, for example, and then get his teeth kicked in at the Battle of Brandywine Creek, and is like, well, maybe we shouldn't fight the British anymore. And, makes a certain amount of sense. He sort of ducks and dodges and weaves across the area, gets the British to split their forces up, and then eventually traps Cornwallis at Yorktown. Congratulations, you won the war. You'll find this again. This is how Napoleon was dealt with, particularly during the later stages of the Wars of the Coalition. Rather than fight Napoleon, you would retreat until you had an overwhelming force and try to push him off. Fabian tactics is generally the idea of trading space for time. In the case of Iran, where they haven't really don't have space to trade because of the aforementioned fact that the concept of front lines is becoming changing and diminishing, the idea isn't so much that you trade space for time, but you preserve your striking power. So Iran is basically a series of mountains surrounded on three sides, and they've dug facilities, missile launch facilities, drone launch facilities into these mountains. And already we're getting intelligence reports that Iran has restored something on the order of 80 to 90% of their missile firing capacity, because we weren't actually destroying launchers or launch sites. We were like collapsing shafts being used to fire missiles out of them, and the Iranians simply cleared the shafts and can resume firing missiles. So they don't really have the ability to oppose the American Air Force in that sense, which is what he's talking about. But they do have the ability, like they have the ability to continue the war in a way that the United States doesn't, because we're running out of precision munitions. We're running out of interceptors. We're running out of some. Yeah, band jumped. They're running out of interceptors. They're running out of the ability to defend against Iranian missiles and drones easily. We're gonna have to work on the drone problem, and we've made some gains, but not enough. And so Donald Trump's only smart, and it's not a smart move because he decided to do it, has been to just not resume the bombing campaign, because the Gulf states and Israel will be the ones that suffer. Like, I don't think this is what Donald Trump is thinking. I think he just wants it to be done and over with. But the ability of our allies to defend themselves is vastly diminished. And Iran's ability to strike back is not nearly as diminished as we thought it was. And this is a version of trading space for time, where they simply trade the illusion of progress for time.
And of course, Iran started supplying Russia mostly with the Shahed drones, but also with some ballistic missiles as well. However, certain things about the war have not exactly played out as they were predicted by the Russians, by Russia simps in the US and in the West. I remember, God, how many years ago, I don't even know, but when Iran was supposedly buying these anti-ship missiles from Russia, and they were very advanced anti-ship missiles, and there was all these articles about how they're going to get this even more advanced anti-ship missile, and that was going to basically lead to all our carrier air groups getting sunk in the Strait of Hormuz or in the Gulf or wherever. There's even an article, I'm pretty sure it was an article, not something I read in a book somewhere. I even tried to use ChatGPT to dig this up, and I cannot find it, but this phrase stuck with me to this day. It was about Iran buying these Russian anti-ship missiles, and it actually used the analogy. It said that these missiles could turn the Persian Gulf, for the U.S. Navy, it could turn it into a naval equivalent of the Battle of Cannae. Now, I'm not much of a classical history guy, but one thing is the Battle of Cannae, you do not want to be the loser in that. That is a battle of annihilation. That's where you basically just get utterly wiped out, right? Obviously, that hasn't happened.
I would. Here's the thing: if the American Navy had decided to brave the Strait any longer than they did for the rare occasions they did, and the Iranians had figured this out, I'm not entirely certain we would have gotten away with what we got away with. The fact of the matter is, American cruise missiles are the latest block of Tomahawks can fire off can be fired 1,000 miles away at a target and hit pinpoint accuracy. We could afford to stay out of the strait. We could afford to sit in the middle of the Gulf and hide and not be easy targets. Our planes have refueling capabilities. Like, we could afford to do that, and we did. And this not being where the Iranians could easily hit us was the best measure of protection that our naval assets could have.
So the damage that the U.S. and its allies in the Gulf have suffered.
Incidentally, this is why no one else's Navy was particularly enthused with Donald Trump's demands that they go open the Strait of Hormuz. The fact of the matter is, the strait is at its widest point, something like 12, 22-ish miles across. It's not much. Uh, it's not much. There's not a lot of space. There's not a lot of time if you get shot to react. You're relying on your defenses almost immediately. It's not a good place to be if you're a warship that doesn't want to get shot. And for example, I have played on stream a sea power mission that was from the tanker war, where you have to escort tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. If you remember, it did crash halfway through because sea power has been lately. But if you remember, I was moving through, and while I had dealt with most of the threats, the land-based missiles were still coming, and I was running low on interceptor missiles. Like, the strait is not a safe place to navigate if Iran or Oman do not want it to be. A destroyer, an Arleigh Burke has 90, something on the order of 70, and a complement of Tomahawks. Various types of standard missiles. There are 92 VLS tubes on an Arleigh Burke class destroyer. Most of those are interceptors. There are 108 VLS tubes in a Ticonderoga. Most of those, again, are interceptors. And some Tomahawks for shooting ships or targets. Yes, once a VLS-equipped ship, a vertical launch system ship, is expended its missiles, it cannot rearm at sea. It has to go to a suitable harbor with a crane that can reload the missiles manually.
Clearly was more than they were expecting. They did seem woefully unprepared for Iran's retaliation, and Iran still seems to have the capability to continue to retaliate with drones and possibly even missiles and such. But the casualties, at the time I'm recording this, I think they're 14. Damage to bases and losses of equipment, of course, that is very expensive. But with the Pentagon budget, we'll manage. And so while, yes, Trump does have his tiny dick stuck in a hornet's nest right now, at the same time, I think Russia, especially the Russian patriots and all their simps abroad, they wanted to see this bloodbath. They wanted to see American aircraft carriers.
Yeah, you're unlikely to see a lot of casualties on the American side just because we're very good at managing that. We're probably the best military in the world at managing CASEVAC and casualty treatment.
Taking hit after hit from these anti-ship missiles and just capsizing over, and that symbol of American power sinking to the bottom of the Persian Gulf. And so far, it's just not happening. And even within the early days of the campaign, the U.S. was able to pretty much fly almost uncontested over Tehran. They've been able to take out Iranian leaders. And that's the type of thing that these Russians and their simps really hate, is they have watched the U.S. with its military supremacy for so long, and they have bought into this cope that Russian technology is advanced to a point where it could somehow neutralize that. And they could say stuff like, okay, yeah, the U.S. can roll into Iraq and bomb them into submission, but surely not Iran. And again, as you see, like, they're actually able to take out a lot of the top leadership pretty much with impunity. Now, this doesn't really affect Russia's war in Ukraine that much. For example, with the supply of Shaheds, Russia's been building them domestically since about late 2022. So far, unfortunately, Ukraine has not significantly disrupted that manufacturing. So they're really not very dependent on Iran for those weapons. But that doesn't...
In fairness, Russian factories, weapon factories, are huge fucking facilities. Destroying them is a job, like a huge job. So like, it's not that the Ukrainians haven't been trying or they're inept. Like, the kinds of the kinds of things that would knock these factories out would be B-52s dropping their loads of like 108 to 500-pound bombs onto targets, and that would do substantial damage. And like, you send like a dozen of them to do this. Like, the Ukrainians don't have that kind of asset and air superiority required to do this. So more or less, they're doing the best they can with what they have available.
I mean, this is not a real gut punch to the last remaining patriots in Russia, because it's just showing how Putin's whole system, this idea that he rebuilt Russia into this global power and that they have this global anti-Western alliance, it's all bullshit. It confirms what I think a lot of them have suspected pretty much all their life, that this has all been smoke and mirrors. I think a lot of these guys jumped on the bandwagon back in 2014, and if they got off it anytime after that, they might have jumped back on in 2022. Most of this time, these guys have just been kind of coping and saying, oh,
Here's the thing: Russia was doing very, very well with liminal warfare, the Jerematov doctrine. When they converted to actually start fighting again, that's when things fell apart.
We're actually fighting all of NATO in Ukraine, and that's why we haven't taken Odessa or Kharkiv yet or something like that. But then they go and they look at the U.S. military, and they look at what happens even when the U.S. military is being run by some of the most incompetent people on the planet, and they are still able to pretty much dog walk Iran when it comes to actually like causing casualties and destruction. The U.S. is able to do that, and Iran can't really do that much back to them. And while we do know that the Russians are doing what they can to assist Iran in the killing of U.S. service personnel, and for the Russians, it must be endlessly funny that the president of the United States doesn't seem to care that they do that. For the Russians, this is not producing the kind of casualties that they want to see. They want to see American troops get slaughtered the way they've been getting slaughtered around Pokrovsk and stuff like that. It's just not happening now. Even if the U.S. does mount some kind of ground invasion, the casualties may be pretty shocking to U.S. audiences.
I don't know the name of the protagonist in this Resident Evil thing, but there's no way he could kick that many barrels and not like break his fucking foot.
The U.S. is way more casualty averse than the Russian populace, but it's not going to be like Bakhmut. It's not going to be like Avdiivka or Pokrovsk. And other than advising and maybe sharing intel, Russia is...
Yeah, here's the thing. If an American military force found itself in a Bakhmut situation, they would fall back and reassess. The closest thing you could say to something like that might be Fallujah in Iraq in the period after the fall of Saddam's government. And that was a very deliberate campaign, orchestrated when they finally went in, orchestrated and designed very specifically to limit casualties. It's just not a thing that we would likely to get in that meat grinder before we unfucked it. Yeah, apparently he has shins of steel.
Pretty much powerless to do anything on behalf of Iran and their situation there. And again, this just proves how Putin's whole new world order, multipolar world order, whatever, is just basically bullshit. One Western country can just still kind of do what it wants, and it just happens to be the Western country that Russians hate the most. And by this point, a lot of the so-called Z bloggers, the mill bloggers, these are guys who actually do know the Russian military.
Yeah, the Russian mill bloggers have been getting increasingly more panicked throughout the year.
Pretty much panicking. Now they are all Igor Girkin, basically. And of course, though, you always have like the bot farms, and you have the trolls, and you have the paid influencers who are still going with this cope of, you haven't seen anything yet. Russia hasn't begun to fight. Just a few days ago, there was a massive attack on Kyiv.
Yeah, but why bring Tim Pool into this?
I experienced it myself. I was already up when it started, so I ended up binge watching this really stupid Resident Evil series. That's the thing about Resident Evil I love, though. It's all stupid. Like, just accept it, and then you can enjoy it. But of course, the pro-Russian segment on Twitter is talking about how Putin has taken the gloves off. Now you'll see, and it's just ridiculous, because, I mean, I haven't done the comparison, but the last attack, it was pretty big. There's been big attacks before. Of course, they launched the...
He's also killed the same man with the same beard and the same fucking pitchfork at least a dozen times.
The Oreshnik Wunderwaffe again, and they managed to destroy some guy's garages out in the suburbs of Kyiv. The guy actually filmed the damage as well. This ICBM, basically, they launch these with dummy warheads, and they act like this is like some big intimidating thing. But all these trolls, these influencers, these people with zero experience in Russia, who don't speak the language, who are just reading Russian state media and telegram channels that are actually intended for dumb, gullible foreigners. These people say one thing, and the actual Russian soldiers and their bloggers who are actually embedded with them are saying something very different. Who are you going to listen to? So, I hate to make predictions. Everybody wants you to predict things. They want their favorite influencer to say what's going to happen. Please, please tell me what's going to happen. When's this war going to end? How's it going to end and everything? And then you got a lot of influencers who will say stuff like, you should listen to me because I predicted this and that. And of course, when you dig in to their actual predictions, you find that they got a ton of things wrong. Maybe they got one thing right, and even the thing they got right, you dig into the details, it's like, oh, wait, you didn't say it was going to happen this way. You said this completely different thing, right? And then you get the guys who predict the exact same thing the entire time. And of course, at some point, you might turn out right. If you just say, if I flip a coin 100 times, it's going to come up heads sometimes, right? Don't even get me started on analysts trying to use predictions as credibility. But here's what I can say. This is my general gut feeling, and I should be able to get in on this action myself very soon. I believe that what happens this summer is going to be kind of pivotal to the war. The Russian spring offensive has kind of been a complete disaster. One more
Yeah, it has not gone well. The Russians really haven't taken any ground.
piece of recent news is that, again, we were talking earlier about how Ukraine has sort of extended the depth of their drone coverage, and now they've extended that to hit logistics on the land bridge to Crimea, and it's having a massive effect. But the big thing that's
The Kerch Strait Bridge has basically been closed to military traffic. It's effectively been interdicted, which is a disaster for Russian troops in Crimea.
happening right now is that they're getting rolled back in certain areas, and elsewhere they're just kind of static. They are stuck. They're not making any significant progress. If this situation holds through the summer, pretty much until the rainy period in the autumn, I believe that next year, I'm not going to say the war is going to end, but what I mean is Russia is going to have to face a painful decision. They're going to have to face a serious dilemma, and I believe that whatever decision they try to take, especially if they want to continue the war the way they've been doing it so far, they're actually going to cause more problems for themselves. I believe that Russia's war, the way they conduct it, is essentially unsustainable, and nobody is going to pull their ass out of the fire. The one last card they had, Trump, it's not happening. I think also they're going to take another big hit to morale. If the Dems take back the House or if they take the Senate in November, then they know that Trump will be even more constrained. I think they should understand that from now till the elections, Trump is mostly
Maybe. I kind of think that congressional Democrats have been incredibly weak and ineffective. Maybe they'll be constrained, but be able to constrain Trump. But thus far, Donald Trump has not really indicated that he's willing to abide by Congress's decisions.
focused on trying to get those gas prices down. Whether or not the war in the Gulf is truly over or what the outcome is, he just wants those gas prices to go down. That's not entirely true. I mean, he also has other distractions as well. He has to keep covering up the Epstein files. He has to keep making money off of insider trading. But right now, that war is kind of taking up all of his bandwidth. So if the line basically holds, the casualty numbers remain consistent, Ukraine's long-range weapons increase in number, and by the way, now they announced they're getting the Gripen fighters with the Meteor missiles, which will do severe damage to their Air Force that's dropping these glide bombs all the time. What advantages they had are starting to evaporate away. Ukraine is also still working on its own ballistic missiles. The use of cruise missiles by Ukraine is going to increase inevitably. The refineries are going to keep getting hit. The oil storage is going to keep getting hit. The oil terminals are going to keep getting hit. And now they're facing a logistics problem. And that's the thing. When you have a massive army and you need this massive army not only to try to keep fighting and advancing, but you also need them to occupy that territory, well, then you need a huge logistical structure to maintain all that. What happens when that basically falls apart and you can't feed the troops, you can't
Or more accurately, doesn't exist to begin with.
supply the troops? I mean, they've had trouble even over a year ago getting water to some of their troops. And when you consider the ramifications of this, in a way, it's kind of good that Putin thinks everything is fine and that he's just pushing ahead, because that means nothing's getting fixed. Now, on that note, the Ukrainian military still has a long way to go fixing a lot of its problems, mostly with bureaucracy. But even on that front, the new defense minister has announced military reforms, and from what I've seen so far, they are very positive. It just remains to be seen how they will be implemented and how quickly. So that is the rundown so far. That's why I'm rather optimistic. Now, of course, you're going to have a legion of idiots show up and say, oh, you said that Russia's going to collapse in 2023. I certainly did not say that. I don't care if some rando NAFO fella tweeted that. That is not me. That is a person who knows no more about the war than you. But I remain cautiously optimistic. Like I said, I think if the summer goes well into about November or so, 2027 is probably going to be the year of decision. What that decision will be remains to be seen. But so far, what I'm seeing are a lot of positive signs, a lot better than 2025. All right, so just to wrap it up, as I said earlier, if you check the description, you can find my Patreon page where you could support my work, but I'm also putting out exclusive podcasts and sometimes free stuff as well. And I go into more detail on some of these topics, so you might want to check that out. As always, like, share, subscribe.
All right. If you haven't, go subscribe to Kozak. Put the link in the chat. All right, I am going to load up the next video and take a hot minute to take care of Avery, and then we will be back. I have started a goal. If we get 5 super chats in the next 38 minutes of at least $2 or more, I will come back on Monday and play Battleship Command, a newly released game in which you operate a German battleship. See you all in a few minutes. All right, welcome back. If you are not familiar with this gentleman, goes by the name of Professor Jang. He is not a professor. He is a Jang for sure, but he's not a professor. He runs a YouTube channel that has recently exploded called Secret or Predictive History, in which he makes a fundamental argument that he can predict the future by knowing history. Um and that his understanding of history is buttressed, or he demonstrates his understanding of history rather, through how accurate his predictions are. And that's not how anything works, as the State Farm commercial says. And I've stayed somewhat, I covered some of this with Sunday in the past about his talks about Iran, and he's a loon. But we are going to go through his video entitled Secret History Number 2, How Societies Collapse. We're not going to do all of this because it's an hour long and it's going to be fucking insane. But we are going to talk about Professor Jang, and we're going to be working on what he does wrong.
Okay, so let's start class. I'm going to review very quickly what we did last class. So last
He pretends he's in a class, by the way. He is not in a real classroom.
class, we
Well, he's in a real classroom. He's just not teaching a class. He's teaching a audience.
learned about monotheism, which is the idea of one true God. And as I said last class, this marked an intellectual revolution in human history. And for
No, it is the worship of a single God as opposed to the worship of a pantheon of gods. The truth of the God is somewhat immaterial.
monotheism, we developed three new ideas, which are money, individual, and the nation state.
No, no, and
It's
no.
important to note that these ideas
Okay, at no point during the development of monotheism as a concept, which is fucking ancient, by the way, one of the earliest monotheistic faiths is Zoroastrianism, several millennia old, and there was no notion of a nation state in what is basically nearly Persia, like it's very ancient Persia, millennia old. A concept of money and coinage emerges independently of like currency is a thing we find in polytheistic cultures throughout the Fertile Crescent, the Indus Valley, and the Chinese or the between the Yangtze and Yellow River. That's not at all accurate. A concept of currency and debt would be somewhat accurate, but none of these things are emergent from monotheism as a concept. They're excuse me. None of these things emerge from monotheism as a concept. They're largely independent of any need for a single god. Like the fucking Babylonians had currency and they had multiple gods. Like what?
have always existed in human history, but with monotheism, these ideas became the dominant paradigms. And together,
No. More to the like, what does individual even mean in that context? But no, not remotely accurate.
they will give us modernity and create the world that we live.
Okay, the start of modernity, such as it is, as historians mark it, is 1500 CE ish. more or less. It can go somewhere around there. Basically, the modern period starts when we begin to see the changes that presage the Renaissance in Western societies, for lack of a better word. Money and nation states, uh, the concept of a nation state doesn't even properly begin to emerge into European consciousness until the Treaty of Westphalia that ends the 30 Years' War in 1648. At no point does like monotheism connect to this in any sense whatsoever. As more to the point, uh, sectarian violence is so endemic to Europe throughout the 1500s and 1600s that they are destabilizing to the kingdoms of Europe in the first place. The French Wars of Religion are a great example. The aforementioned 30 Years' War or the connected 80 Years' War. The 30 Years' War is devastating to Central Europe, what would be eventually called Germany. What on earth are you talking about, sir?
In today.
This is why we're not getting through that much of this, because it's been a minute and I'm already flipping the fuck out.
Okay, so that's what we discussed last class. And remember, last class, we also discussed that this created a lot of problems for us. There are a lot of benefits, but there are also a lot of consequences. Okay, so
More money, more problems, huh? Is that what we're doing here?
we're going to continue the story of humanity today. And today, I want to focus on a very specific question. Why do societies rise and why do they fall? Okay, and I know that these first few classes may seem abstract and theoretical, but that's because we're developing
They better. Okay, why do societies fall? Societies collapse when it can no longer sustain for itself a standard of living. This is a really fucking simple answer, but what do I mean by that? Let's take the Bronze Age collapse. Around 1200 BCE, you see a number of societies in the Eastern Mediterranean: the Mycenaeans, the Egyptians, the uh, why is their name slipping? Ankara, you know who I'm talking about. The Babylonians. All these societies begin to experience a series of droughts, a series of poor harvests, and violence brought on by an invasion of the sea peoples. And these combined factors cause these societies to no longer be able to provide, to no longer adapt, to no longer be able to provide security for trade, for food growing, for all these things that these societies rest upon. Their ability to do this collapses. They can no longer provide the standard of living they did, and their societies are either overrun, for example, in the case of the Mycenaeans, and effectively destroyed, or severely reduced, such as the Egyptians. So societies collapse when the fundamental things that the society provides are no longer available.
analytical models in order to better understand our world. So as we move on, we will start looking at very concrete examples. But for the first few classes, please be patient. We are going to develop the theory to understand the world. All right? So let's discuss societies, why they rise.
Yes, there was also a significant interdependency because the prevailing technology of the Bronze Age was bronze, which is a combination alloy of tin and copper. You could only get these specific metals at very specific places over very long trade routes. When the trade routes are no longer secure and no one can gain access to the principal technology that is used to fuel militaries and farming and everything, those systems start to collapse.
And why they decline. Now, unfortunately, we live in a world in decline. So there are lots of signs that the world is in decline. What are these signs?
This is just going to be some Chinese communist eschatology, isn't it?
Shout out some signs. Yeah, very good, okay? So you have conflict and wars. You look at the situation in Ukraine, look at the situation in the Middle East, but also you may have seen the news and you have seen conflicts arising in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Myanmar. Also, Trump is about to send U.S. troops to Mexico and Venezuela. Okay, so we live in a world of conflict.
We're critically low on taco supplies, apparently. Conflict is not a sign of decline. Conflict, this is very contingent. Very, very contingent. Going back to the 5 Cs, and let's see if I replaced this screen prep accurately. I did. It has the D. Excellent. Not the T. Anyway, this is very contingent upon what is the conflict, when does it take place, and what does the parties gain or lose when they lose the conflict. Like a nation that is losing a conflict is going to be in decline, but a kingdom, for example, that conquers their neighbors, such as Rome, might be on the rise. Conflict is not in and of itself a indicator of decline. It is a crucible in which a society or a kingdom or a polity might be changed. The conflict in and of itself does not presage decline, though.
And that tells us that the world is in decline. What are some other signs?
Environmental issues.
Good, yes. So you have climate change.
Climate change is a natural occurring phenomena that is powered by humans. It does not indicate a society in decline, but once again, it indicates a society that will have to adapt, that will suffer casualties, not necessarily something that presages a collapse. What you do to respond to climate change might cause your society to decline, but the climate change itself is not a sign of decline.
Okay, we are putting too much pressure on the environment, so the air, the water, the land is becoming much more toxic. Okay, good. What else?
It's not even a question of necessarily a case of toxic. Yes, there are cases where pollutants are causing toxicity to leach into soil and water tables and all those things. But what climate change is a change in the systems of weather. So, for example, there is a current running through the North Atlantic that causes weather patterns to happen all over Europe, the United Kingdom. It is collapsing. If it collapses and that current no longer stays in effect, there will be severe climate changes to places. You will see England become cold and snowy all the time. You will see it have a layer of permafrost develop, things like that. This is not necessarily toxicity. There's a whole host of things that can go on climate change. Recent study released that said that New Orleans is not a tenable city to continue to inhabit, that it must be evacuated, that it will flood again like it flooded in Katrina. That's not an accurate display of what climate change is.
Good, yes. Unemployment is going.
Unemployment is so fucking contingent, it's not even funny. Unemployment fluctuates all the time and in response to any number of factors. A society that is experiencing unemployment is not evidence of decline.
Up. But not only that, but people's attitude towards work is declining. We live in an age when people don't take work that seriously. People are not as enthusiastic, they're not as motivated to work hard as before.
That's less a sign of the decline of a society and more a collapse caused by the increasing inequities of capitalism in our society. You work and work and work, and someone else is reaping the benefits, the principal benefits of that work, and you're barely able to get by. Your enthusiasm for that work is going to decrease. This is basic Marxism. People want to work for themselves. They find it enriching and rewarding. And what the fuck are you smoking, kid? Yes, like people do not benefit from their work. And this causes them to not be enthusiastic about it, but that's a fixable problem. That's not a question of the society's declining. That is a failure of the mode by which society works at.
We call this in China the Bailan age, right? The age of Bailan, meaning let it rot. Like, who cares? Don't take things too seriously. In America, the term is called quiet quitting. Okay, you pretend to work, but you're not really working.
No, that's not quiet quitting, first of all. Quiet quitting is when you do not work in excess of the requirements of your posting. It's a salary position thing, first of all. You are paid by the hour for most hourly positions, and therefore quiet quitting is not really a thing. You just do your job and go home. Salaried workers are expected to display and get on the corporate treadmill, and in so doing, they work beyond the dictates of their contracts of salary. Quiet quitting is not working. It is not working beyond that which you are being paid to work. It is the assertion of boundaries in work, but not necessarily not working.
What are some other signs?
This guy is so fucking far from the mark. Jesus fuck. How did he get this far?
So also you have lower birth rate. And this is a very important sign, right? Because if you think about it, if young people refuse to get married and have babies, eventually the world is going to die off, right?
Probably not, to be frank. If you take a basic geography class, you will be exposed to a population triangle. A population triangle is supposed to narrow out as people get older. You have fewer older people who are supported, in turn, by a growing set of younger people. This is pretty basic geography stuff, but by and large, you can survive a certain amount of population fluctuations inside that triangle. The fact of the matter is, once again, we come back to what your work yields for you, your family, your immediate things. If you are not making enough money, you're not going to have kids. That fucking simple. The fact of the matter is that as income inequality grows, populations decline. You see this again and again and again in history, which is why I make a fundamental argument that taxing the rich does not need to be because we need to tax the rich for some program. Taxing the rich is something that enriches society by preventing income inequality from destroying societies. This is not a case of the birth rate itself is not a sign of the decline. It is a symptom of a failure to properly regulate economic activity.
So this is actually a very important sign that the world is in decline. And we're seeing this happen throughout the entire world in all societies. The only exception
We are not. There's a fairly significant increase in birth rate in the global south, which is going to cause its own problems when you think about climate change, but that's beside the point.
is Israel and Georgia, but these are very small.
No, Israel is not showing a birth rate decline, and they're not properly the global south, but they kind of are. There are any number of countries where you're seeing an increase in birth rate, particularly in places where census taking is not nearly as good as it is in Europe or Asia or North America.
Rare cases. For most societies, there's rapid decline in birth rate. What are some other signs? Okay, you see a lower standard of living. Okay, and all this means is
Again, not a sign of the decline of a society, but rather a sign of income inequality.
that inflation, right? So people make less money and they can afford less. Prices go up, but people's wages go down. So that's another sign of decline. Okay? What are some other signs?
Health issues like diabetes or high blood pressure.
Okay, you also see higher stress, right? Higher stress, people feel more anxious, people feel more depressed.
No. I don't have to explain that we don't have a societal measure of stress anywhere. Stress is an individualized phenomenon, and certain people feel stress about certain things at certain times. Certain people do not. This is painful. We might carry this on into next week.
People feel more stressed. Emotionally, they feel drained. Okay, what else?
We're almost at the 2 hour mark. We'll probably go about another 20 minutes.
Okay, people are less optimistic, right? Okay, greater pessimism.
I'm becoming more pessimistic as I watch this, but I don't think that's going to destroy society.
Okay, also, and this is really important, is the idea of debt, right?
Debt is not a sign of the decline of a society. Debt is, when managed properly, a fairly healthy thing to have, to be perfectly frank, for a country.
Both public and private. There are lots of governments around the world that are facing a fiscal crisis. A fiscal crisis just means that they spend more than they take in tax revenue. There are many families in China, in the United States, throughout the world that are heavily in debt.
They're in debt because their ability to live in their means is severely challenged by price increases, many of which are not really responding necessarily to cost increases to begin with. An artificial system created by Donald Trump's tariffs, for example. This is, once again, income inequality. The work you are doing to avoid doing basic leftist theory is ridiculous, sir. Just the sheer amount of work you are doing to ignore the idea that a growing gap between wealthy people and everyone else is dangerous is hilarious. The K-shaped economy is not a problem because it's K-shaped. It's a problem because it creates a set of circumstances in which the average person can no longer afford to exist in their society.
Okay, so debt is a huge issue for the world today. Also, lower cohesion and trust. And what this means is that people no longer trust each other as they did before. Society is less cohesive. If you walk on the street and you see a man on the street bleeding or hurt, you're less likely to help him. Okay, and this is very true not only in China, but also elsewhere.
The bystander effect is a fairly significantly observed phenomenon, but this is not something that's new or tagged to a period of time when it didn't exist. Even running back to the Bible and the parable of the Good Samaritan is an example of on the bystander effect and the expectation that it exists even in fucking classical fucking Rome. Like I don't, how do you measure social cohesion? You can measure a certain amount of trust in a government, and that certainly has declined, and that can be dangerous to a government, but that does not preclude a government recovering that trust either.
As well. So lower trust issues. What are some other signs?
Crime across much of Europe and the United States is at an all-time low.
Disease.
Okay, greater disease, yeah. Okay, increase in disease. People are less healthy than before. People are more stressed than before. People are less optimistic.
That optimism is not a disease, or the lack of optimism, rather, is not a disease.
So we can go on and on and on because the signs.
No, you need to keep going because you actually haven't found a sign of a society in decline. I named several at the outset of this, and you've named none of them. What you've named is a bunch of right-wing bugbears, but you haven't actually named a sign of a society in decline. Not a single one, in any kind of general sense, if you named, is a sign of society in decline. At all. Not a one-on-one.
Of rapid social decline are too many. Now, these are signs of decline. Well, if we look at rise, then obviously,
if a society's on the rise, it's taken a little blue pill.
it's the opposite, right?
For golden ages lasting more than 4 decades, please consult your doctor.
People are much more willing to trust each other. Rather than going into debt, people will save money. People are healthier. People are much more optimistic. People are having lots and lots of babies, right?
That's just a sign of being Catholic.
People are employed. Okay? So these are all signs that society is in decline. The rise, it's the opposite. Also, another sign of decline that's very important that doesn't really happen in China, but happens in the Western world is immigration. Okay? Immigration.
Where do you think Chinese Americans come from, sir? Immigration is not a sign of decline, also. It's just a sign of movement. He's just a fucking Nazi. Jesus, isn't he? You're just a Nazi. Like, you're just a fascist dude, aren't you? You're just a fascist. This is like Evola if Eva was incredibly stupid. It's brain damaged Mein Kampf. And Mein Kampf wasn't that good. Immigration tends to be fundamentally very good for income inequality, in that it makes income inequality grow. Also, done properly, immigration creates a velocity of money, which is effective in making people have more money and combating inflation. Like, we don't do a good job of that here in the United States because we keep making it impossible for people to like come over, work, and go home, which would assist in the creation of velocity of money. But like, that done properly, immigration is really fucking good for a liberal economy. Like, on the whole.
Immigration is a huge issue in the Western world, and we will discuss immigration in future classes. But immigration is a sign of decline because it reduces cohesion.
No, it's not. Look, when they said there was going to be a taco truck on every corner of Hillary Clinton, I'm like, don't you fucking threaten me with a good time.
Okay? And it also reduces the standard of living. Okay?
No, it doesn't.
Okay? Another
Just objectively does not. There's nothing to do with that.
sign of decline is also
Brown people are not why you can't afford fucking gas. Actually, that's not entirely true. Some of them are very brown. But the fact that brown people coming over the border is not why you can't afford gas.
housing prices.
No! Immigration is not affecting housing prices. Also, housing prices are a function of market factors, not a function of the health of a society.
Go up. So people can no longer afford to buy a house. This is true in China. Young people can no longer afford to buy a house, but it's also true throughout.
It's because you keep trying to extract the most money possible out of home buyers instead of building houses they need. That's not a sign of decline. That's a sign of greed, motherfucker.
The world, okay? It's really hard for young people to get by, okay? All right.
And all they have to do to get by is kill the Jews, apparently. Where are we going with this, brother?
Also, fiscal crisis, right? We talked about this, but the idea of fiscal crisis is the government.
Yeah, but that's private. That's public debt. Public debt to spending ratio. Now you've now listed the same thing twice. It's also not a sign of decline.
Cannot afford a lot of public expenditures. In the future, maybe 5-10 years from now, pension will be a huge problem for governments.
Okay. It's 2 hours in. Thank you all for coming out. Next stream will be on Wednesday, Ultimate General Civil War. Get up, go walk around. Subscribe. It makes the doggy happy. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you much.